I feel like I need to do vocal warm-ups because I haven't actually spoken today. Hello, and welcome back or welcome to my channel and to a February wrap-up video. In my goal to upload more in 2023, we are including booktube content and specifically wrap-up videos because they are my favourite videos to watch. I love the end of every month because I can just consume like 20 wrap-up videos in a row and I'm suddenly like, my TBR is growing way faster than I need it to be. But luckily it is also going down a little bit because I have read 7 books this month and I did kind of want to read 10 because I read 10 last month, but my goal for the year is 75 books. I've currently read 17 and obviously February is a little bit shorter as well, so I'm taking that into context and I'm not mad about reading 7 books. But before we get into those 7 different books, I did kind of want to implement like a little statistics section at the start of a wrap-up video. I love watching wrap-up videos with statistics in them, namely Meg with books. I love it when she has all the little pie charts on the screen, and because I'm tracking some of the data, I'm gonna put it in here. If not for you, then for me. So the average star rating I gave to a book this month was 4 stars. That's a lot more of a round number than I thought it was gonna be. The average date released was 2018. I read a lot of contemporary books. I think the earliest I read was 2015. The average time spent on my TBR was 6.7 months. I'm not overly fussed about that. There's a couple that I read exactly after buying them because I broke my book buying ban for them, but I'm not too mad about that because I did get one that's been there for 2 years, one that's been there for 8 months. In terms of standalone versus series, I read 2 series and 5 standalone, and then in terms of the author, 3 were new to me and 4 were authors that I have read from before. So now that is out of the way, I've decided that instead of doing them in chronological order like I did last time, I'm going to do them from worst to best so that every book I'm telling you about is slightly better than the one before, in my opinion. I really like watching rankings that way because I feel like I'm still really invested. I get more invested as it goes on to reach like the #1 book of the month or whatever. But there are 2 that I am going to leave out of that ranking. I did film a Taylor Jenkins reading vlog in which I read Maybe in Another Life and One True Loves. So I'm not going to really talk about them in this video, but I did give Maybe in Another Life 3 stars and One True Loves 4 stars. But if you want to see my actual opinions on them, then you should probably go and watch that. So, starting with my least favourite book of the month, which I still did actually quite enjoy, we have Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. Jessica Anya Blau. So I actually listened to this on Scribd via an audiobook, and this is the first audiobook I've consumed since like 2005 or something. So I think my rating of it might have fallen because I'm just not an audiobook type of person, I don't think. In this book, we have Mary Jane, who is the daughter of a very traditional Christian conservative household, and she takes up a job as a summer nanny for a house down the road that's a lot more liberal. We basically have a young teenager coming to terms with the fact that people aren't acting in the way that she thought they'd be necessarily. I did really love the fact that while Mary Jane found fault with how her parents raised her in this very closed mindset compared to the open-hearted family down the road, she did appreciate what they did for her and how those actions had formed her as a person, and she could take that with her in the future when she's deciding the type of person that she wants to be. It was a really heartwarming story and I did really enjoy it, but I did only end up giving it 3 stars because I found a lot of the dialogue and speech really quite cringe. And I know that this is the same for me with a lot of US literature in the kind of general fiction category. I think it can be quite cringe because it's not what I'm used to. It's not just literature as well. Like when I watch American TV shows, I find myself inwardly cringing a lot at the lines that they say. It's not really my thing. So while I did really like the story, I don't think the writing was for me. It just wasn't really my thing, but I do recommend it for other people. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is Perfect by Cecilia Ahern, and I finally read this after meaning to get to it for literally 2 years. So this is the sequel to Flawed by Cecilia Ahern, and it is a dystopian duology where, as well as the court of justice, we also have a court of morality. So as well as the police that punish you for breaking the law, we also have another system that punishes you for committing what they consider to be immoral decisions. And the way that they punish you is by branding you with a hot iron in the shape of an F so that everyone around you will know that you're flawed, and then these flawed people kind of become outcasts to society. They can't get jobs as easily, they're not really allowed into shops, they can't gather in groups of more than 2. My main criticism for this book is that it's obviously a really dark world where you can't make a mistake without being punished for it for the rest of your life. It's talking about all of these horrendous things that have happened to these people, but the writing style doesn't reflect that in the slightest. It's actually really light and airy, and it kind of ruins the immersion because you don't feel like you're in this horrible universe with them. And I know that it is a young adult dystopian book, but that's not really an excuse. We've got The Hunger Games, we've got The Maze Runner, we've got Divergent. All of these books are so gritty, and it just feels like this slight break. It's such an interesting, dark topic, but we're kind of really removed from that by the writing style. And that really annoys me because I had the exact same criticism for the first one, and I thought by this one we could really get stuck into it, but we just didn't. I also think there are a few inconsistencies that were quite subtle, but when you've got this court of morality, there wasn't really a blanket statement for what you could do and what you couldn't do, and there were some things that characters were doing that I believe they would have actually been branded for, or some things that people had done that just, it didn't kind of feel particularly realistic within this world of the story. However, I still did give it 4 stars. I found it really enjoyable to read, and I also found it really motivating and really rousing. It kind of looks at the differences between liberal change versus radical change. At the end of the day, sometimes talking nicely isn't enough, and sometimes you need that massive movement of people to come together, and that really warmed my heart and made me feel quite fondly towards humanity, actually. And then next up we have A Spoonful of Sugar by Robin Stevens, another Murder Most Unladylike mystery. I love these books so much. I have no idea how I got into them, but they're such a massive part of me now. I kicked off a reread of this series in 2021, but I'd only actually read half of the series, so this is the first one that I hadn't read before. Normally we have Hazel and Daisy solving murders in a very wealthy, typical 1920s English boarding school environment, but in this one, the two visit Hazel's family in Hong Kong. It was a really interesting dynamic as we finally had more of a focus on Hazel. She's the narrator throughout this entire series, but she's definitely the second in command, the Watson to Daisy's Sherlock. Suddenly Hazel is the one that knows more about the culture. She's the one that speaks the language better. She's the one that understands the people, and the people respect her more so than Daisy. It's kind of really satisfying to see Daisy take note of the fact that she's not objectively cleverer than her best friend. She's just more confident. Throughout this series, we've seen Hazel begin to realise that Daisy isn't always right, but in this book, she really learns to believe in herself, and as she should, because she smashes this. This series is just the absolute peak of middle grade mystery, and I love them each more as they go along because Hazel learns to believe in herself more with every single one. They're just my favourite. And we're on to the 5-star reads of February. This one maybe should have been 4.5, but I don't like giving half ratings, and giving it 4 definitely felt like doing it a disservice, so it's got a 5-star. And this one was A Bookshop in Algiers by Cleopatra Adimi. So this story is of a man who is sent to clear and empty out this old bookshop and publishing house, and it's intercut with the diary of the man who set it up decades and decades before. It's set against a backdrop of post-colonial Algeria, and for only 208 pages, it manages to write this beautiful love letter to the culture, to the people, to the community of the country. It touches on the attitudes of the 1930s towards Algerian authors, about how they were very much restricted from going into print, particularly when put up against French authors, and particularly when they were writing things that might not be considered entirely supportive of the French rule over Algeria. We have the owner of the bookshop that is desperately trying to champion these struggling Algerian authors with their creativity and their passion, and he's also trying to run a business at the lowest cost possible to support the local community and make sure that everyone has access to reading. And then far in the future, we have this man who's just trying to do his job. He's got no connection to literature, and he's confronted with the history of this bookshop and how much it means to the people supporting of it. It's such a beautiful book, and it's so short that you might as well just pick it up and give it a read. And then my favourite read that I read in February was Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. This is just a bunch of messed up people vibing in New York City in the early 2000s. I can absolutely see why some people don't like this book, and it's definitely walking that line of pretentious in a similar way to Normal People by Sally Rooney does, but I was just transfixed by it. These characters are so flawed. They go through horrible things, and they do horrible things to each other, and you probably will not like a single one of them. I've seen a lot of hate online for Cleo, who's one of the main characters. I feel like she's me, but prettier, more talented, more interesting. So if people hate her, people were slating her in their Goodreads reviews, and I was just sat there like, I found her really relatable. The incredible character creation in this book is the glue that holds all of these micro plots together. We go from addiction to loneliness to unrequited love, the patriarchy, sugar daddies, medical bills that bankrupt you. This story is so alive. It is vivid, it is passionate, but it's also carried by this great subtlety and cleverness, and I just loved every second of it. So those are all the books that I read in February. I was actually going to say January then because this year is moving far too quickly. I'm absolutely loving doing booktube videos recently. I know they don't do as well as Darren vlogs, but there are only so many times I can film myself sat in the baby. I'm joking, I've got many more Darren videos to come, but I'm just loving sitting down and talking about the books that I've read. I'm thriving. So thank you so much for watching right until the end. I'm so happy you've stayed with me and I hope to see you very soon. Goodbye.